Hey, welcome back to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. I'm your host, Coach Zach. I'm here with two of the lovely ladies of Legacy, Miss Gracie and Miss Brandy. How you guys doing?
Good.
Living the dream today.
Of course.
Always.
Every day.
Every day. Sweet. Today, we are talking about carbohydrates. Are they good? Are they bad? There's a lot of information, misinformation about carbohydrates. So we're going to go kind of in depth. The notes that you guys have are ridiculous. We're going to go kind of in depth on carbohydrates, what they do, and if they're the enemy or not the enemy. But before we do that, we want to give a little shout out to a client of the week. We have like the whole entire Celestina family here pretty much. So we've given Pete and Barb and Matt and Mike and all of them shout outs. But Pete was the OG one. Now his brother and his sister-in-law have moved to town, and we want to give a shout out to Tracy, his sister-in-law, Tracy Celestina, because she's absolutely just been crushing it. She shows up regularly, and she's just an absolute like delight to have around, right? So I don't know if you guys have anything to say other than the fact that it's like she just shows up and she's happy and she works hard, and it's just refreshing. It's awesome.
Yeah, and she's got a lot going on in her life, and she still makes time to be here and to work hard. And I just really love that and appreciate it, and does it with a smile, like you said, and with a great attitude.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, they're moving and just the whole chaos, and she's just here, right?
Yep.
So moving boxes and then coming in and working out.
That's right.
Yeah. So, all right, ladies. I said, hey, this was like a week ago or a little over a week ago. I was like, hey, next podcast episode, we're doing a deep dive on carbohydrates. And I was like, be ready. So you guys look ready with the amount of notes that you have here. So first off, carbohydrates, right? Carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. It's just like, that doesn't sound that bad, right? When you say it like that, that's what makes up carbohydrates. It's just those three things. But there's a lot of like, I guess, good carbohydrates and what could be deemed as bad carbohydrates. So Brandy, I'm going to go to you first because you're our
Let's go.
You're Brandy, the nutrition coach.
Okay.
So, like, what do carbohydrates do? First of all, like, why do we eat them? Just kind of give everybody like an overview here.
So carbohydrates, first of all, it's one of our three main macronutrients. So we have carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So carbohydrates broken down, 4 calories per gram is how they're broken down. They're glucose, so they provide glucose. They're stored in the body as glycogen, which then in turn provides the body with energy. So it's a fuel source. It's the body's main fuel source for energy, are carbohydrates. So that's the main purpose. They provide us with energy. They provide us with nutrition. There are many different types of carbohydrates, so we can go into that.
Okay, I don't know, like we're talking like polysaccharides and saccharides and all that. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, there's right.
Okay, I don't know if we need to go that far in depth, but basically, like, carbohydrates. There's sugars and starches and fiber, I guess, and it like is all broken down into different like sugars or a type of sugar that then the body uses as fuel. It turns it into energy. That energy is either used or stored in our muscle cells, as glycogen, and then when we're doing some sort of activity and we need that fuel, then we're basically like tapping into the cell and pulling that energy out and using it for activity, whatever that is, right, for energy levels. Gracie, do you have anything to add to that, or is that, I guess, enough for now?
I mean, I think that's enough for now, but I can always add more.
Go ahead.
So like carbohydrates, you have your complex carbohydrates, then you have your simple carbohydrates, which I think a lot of the time is where people get the misconception of good versus bad.
Sure.
So complex versus simple. Your complex carbohydrates are going to be able to raise your blood glucose levels for a longer period of time and produce that lasting energy, whereas your simple carbohydrates are going to cause you that like blood sugar spike or that sugar rush, that sugar high that people think about. So I think that's kind of the biggest difference in terms of your complex and your simple carbohydrates and how your body is going to digest them.
So simple carbohydrates are higher on the glycemic index,
Yes.
meaning they spike your blood sugar levels faster. And really, like, the faster your blood sugar levels spike, the faster they're going to come down and you're going to crash, right?
Yes.
I think the kind of the key component here is I don't think you can have a conversation about carbohydrates and blood sugar and all that without really talking about fiber, right? And so you mentioned complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates are foods that are high in fiber typically, because fiber is basically the structure of a food, and our body doesn't digest it. It's just something that goes in with the food and then like pushes it out, and you have soluble and insoluble, and they're either speeding up digestion or slowing down digestion. I can't remember which is which. Do you know?
Soluble fiber, so it dissolves in water and forms a gel. So examples, just to give people examples of like what in soluble fiber would be. So that's your oats, your barley, legumes, most fruits, especially like pears, berries, things like that. Then the insoluble fiber, so that does not dissolve in water, promotes more like bowel regularity, those types of things. So whole brands, cereals, whole grains, lentils, legumes, nuts, especially vegetables, and then fruits and like the outer skins of fruits are your soluble fiber sources.
And it's important to have those when you're having carbohydrates, because then we're not taking up as much sugar from the carbohydrates, correct? So this is, again, like complex versus simple. It's like, this is really where I guess we have to divide the conversation and say, like, these carbs are your enemy, or is that the way to put it? And these carbs are like your friend.
Well, I don't know. I disagree with saying enemy, because I think there are, some simple carbohydrates. So you could think of like your juices, Gatorades, candy, stuff like that.
Stuff that's high in sugar.
High in sugar, not the most nutrient dense. They don't have a lot of vitamins and minerals that your other carbohydrates will have, but they can provide some benefit. So some benefit to like a simple carbohydrate is they are going to spike the glucose level in the blood. So if you need like an instant, like if you are going to do something that requires a lot of effort, like right now, a simple carbohydrate can increase your blood glucose level and give you that energy like right away. Simple carbohydrates are usually digested. You start digestion in the mouth with your saliva as you're chewing them, and then they're digested in the small intestine, where more complex carbohydrates take longer time to digest. So if you need that quick burst of energy, then you can get that from simple carbohydrates, like your white rices, bread, stuff like that. But if you want more sustained long-term energy, then you really want to look more toward your complex carbohydrates. And you're going to get more nutrition. They're more nutrient dense from your complex carbohydrates.
Which also means that they're probably going to be lower in calorie, but keep you fuller longer, right? So if you're trying to lose weight, it's important to go with a more complex carbohydrate, because now even if I'm on a calorie deficit, it's like I don't feel as hungry, right? I feel more satisfied, and then I don't get those blood sugar crashes. So I'm not getting hangry, right? I'm not like, oh, I gotta get the sugar in again. And then there's not as many calories that I'm going to be taking in. And so like the volume is probably bigger, but there's less calories.
Right. Many more benefits from the complex carbohydrates.
Yeah. Are there any other like benefits you would say of the simple carbohydrates?
I think Brandy did a really good job of pointing out like the benefits of the simple carbohydrates. It really is just for, that quick energy. I don't know if you're going to work out or something, maybe you have like a rice cake right before and then you go for your workout, but something like that's going to give you the energy. Or I know a lot of time, like runners, if you're running, they'll take like those little energy chews or something that's going to have a lot of sugar.
Endurance athletes, yeah. Okay, but what about like now? What are some things, Gracie, that somebody needs to be cautious of taking in like too many simple carbohydrates?
Sugar levels, because when you consume too much sugar, that's not going to be, if it's not going to be used right away, that's going to be stored as fat. And then a lot of the time that fat is going to, once it's stored, it just kind of stays there. It's not going to go anywhere until you expend more energy than you're consuming, which is going to lead you to weight gain. So back to that
fat
point. Yeah.
People need to understand that fat is stored energy, right?
Yes.
So if we can't, like what you're saying is if we're not going to immediately use that, then those sugars are going to turn into stored fat, which is fat on our body, right? Like fatty tissue that we're going to reserve for later when we need to break it down and use that energy. I would say the other kind of important thing to recognize is we think of carbohydrates, sugar intake, spiking your blood sugar levels. It's like, okay, well, we know that there's this disease out there called diabetes that impacts insulin. And I don't know if everybody, like if you don't have diabetes, you might not entirely understand that response. But basically what is happening is when your blood sugar levels increase, insulin is going to pull those sugars out of your blood and store them in the cells, right? And so taking in too many simple carbohydrates and you get this constant blood sugar spike or like these peaks and valleys, you can become insulin resistant. Right. And then all of a sudden, like our body can't keep up with the amount of sugar that we're putting in. It can't regulate your blood sugar levels, which can obviously cause pre-diabetes and then potentially diabetes when you have to have like insulin supplemented, right? And you're injecting insulin into yourself. So, and that's a very common thing that we'll see, or that you'll see with type 2 diabetes, where people just have over the years eaten too many simple carbohydrates, processed foods, continually spiked their blood sugar over and over and over again until their body's like, hey, we can't keep up with the demands here. We can't produce enough insulin. And, boom, there we are.
That becomes a big problem.
That becomes a big problem. So, okay, Brandy, back to you.
Okay.
I feel like a newscaster. Back to you. What else do people need to know? I mean, you got the pile of notes there. Brandy's got like eight pages of notes lined out.
Really, I think the most important thing for people to know is that carbohydrates are not bad. In fact, carbohydrates are really, really important, especially for someone who, is wanting to strength train or they're doing some sort of physical activity. Your body needs that fuel in order to be successful, to give you that energy that you need, throughout your day, throughout your workout. Also your body needs that fuel, to do digestion and all the different processes that your body goes through. I think it's really important. So we talked about simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates, to really consume more of the complex carbohydrates. So you want to get your carbohydrates from things like vegetables, fruit, starches, grains, legumes, things like that are going to give you energy and fuel, and then are also going to give you those added micronutrients, so other vitamins and minerals that your body needs, and then will it will give you, your body what it needs. Hormone health is really important. So your body needs carbohydrates to maintain adequate hormone levels, especially as you age. So, a lot of times as women are going through menopause, we can see hormones impacted, and a lack of carbohydrates can lead to some adverse reactions in terms of your hormones.
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that carbohydrates are the majority of the food that we eat, right? And so we shouldn't be vilifying them, because if we're doing like a macro-based meal plan for somebody and we're looking at somebody's macro breakdown, it's like probably anywhere from 35 to 60% of their diet, depending on their body type and goals, 35 to 60% is going to be carbohydrates. Right. And so and that's just like at a minimum, right? Like a third of your diet would be carbohydrates, and that would be low, right? So it's important for people to understand, hey, you need the nutrients, right? You need the carbohydrates. The key is having your carbohydrates come from vegetables, from fruit, and not primarily from processed foods and, very, let's say like a white bread, right? Where that's going to spike your blood sugar levels. You're not going to be able to use it or anything like that. And that's really where people get into trouble. And I think that's why like a low carb diet has worked in the past for people, or become kind of like a popular idea, is because if you're just being aware of the type of carbohydrates that you're taking in, it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to eat that pasta, right? I'm not going to have that white bread. I'm going to get my carbohydrates from fruits and vegetables and beans and, rice or whatever. And so any diet out there that claims to be like low carb, it's really, they're just telling you, hey, avoid those avoid those shallow carbs that aren't going to provide you with nutrients anyway. Exactly. And when people become aware of that, it's like, oh, well, of course you're losing weight, right? Of course you're losing weight. And if you're taking in more fiber, of course you feel fuller, and now we don't need to eat. We don't have the desire to eat as much, right? You mentioned hormones, carbohydrates, fiber, really important for cholesterol, healthy cholesterol levels. There have been studies shown that when it's not even necessarily about the sugar intake, but the fiber intake can lower LDL. And so if you have any type of cholesterol issues, it's like, don't avoid the fruit, don't avoid the vegetables. You'd still need some healthy fats in your diet, right? And that won't impact your cholesterol levels, but the fiber has to be there as well, right? And that's going to come primarily from your carbohydrate sources. So, okay. I don't have anything else to say on this outside of eat your fruits and vegetables, just like Mom always said, right? I mean, that's basically what it comes down to, is it's the quality of food that you're getting. And if you're eating processed foods, go back like 2 weeks ago to the episode we did about processed foods, and you'll realize, oh, well, that's the mistake that I'm making, as opposed to thinking it's just carbohydrates.
Right.
Cool?
Eat those carbs.
Eat those carbs. All right, guys, that's all we have for you. We'll be back next week with more great stuff. Thank you so much for listening to the Healthy Living Scottsdale podcast. Do you have a question that you'd like for us to answer live on the podcast? If so, all you need to do is head over to the Apple Podcast app on your iPhone and do 3 simple things. First, leave us a rating and review telling me what you think of the podcast. In that review, ask anything you want related to health, fitness, or nutrition. And if you want a shout out, leave us your Instagram handle or name. That's all you have to do. Then listen to hear your questions answered live on the next Q&A episode.